Joining me today for the interview is Dr. Katie Martin. Katie is the Vice President of Professional Learning at Altitude Learning, where she supports schools and districts in their shift toward learner-centered education. Now, before joining Altitude, she served as Director of District Leadership at the Buck Institute of Education, and most of you would be very familiar with the Buck Institute's work around project-based learning. Katie began her career as a middle school English language arts teacher. She has also served as an instructional coach and led a mentoring program also in her district as well. She is the author of Learner-Centered Innovation, and that book is going to be the foundation for our conversation today. And one thing that really struck me with Katie was Katie believes that if we want to change how students learn, we have to change how educators learn. So I'm really excited about this conversation. So Katie, with that, I want to welcome you to the Tom Schimmer podcast.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. And for listeners, if you haven't read Learner-Centered Innovation yet, I can tell you that I was exactly one chapter into this book and decided to reach out to Katie and say, I have to have you on the podcast. So, we made it happen and here we are. So, Katie, I want to begin today with a question just about your background and your experience. Can you tell us a little bit more specifically what you started as an English language arts teacher, and what's the pathway, what's the arc of that story that takes you from being a middle school English language arts teacher to down the pathway of learner centered and innovation and all that happened to lead you to where you are today?
Yeah, great question. Some people think it's this master plan, but truly, like we were talking about before we joined, I wanted to become a teacher because I didn't love school myself, and so I wanted to be a teacher who was able to help students figure out who they were, find their passion, and really see that learning was something that they could do for themselves, not just for a test. And so that truly was all I wanted to do, and still guides me to this day. But as I had the opportunity to go to school and learn through amazing educators and mentors that I had, in some ways I got asked to be an instructional coach, and I realized that not only did I have a love for teaching students, but I really was inspired and excited by working with my colleagues and helping them find their passion and really connect with their students. And then I had the opportunity we had 20 new teachers coming in every year to our school, because I was teaching in Hawaii at the time, and we had a lot of influx of teachers from the mainland. And I really started getting excited about supporting new teachers from the very beginning, and helping them see their practices and develop them before more traditional mindsets got ingrained. And it was just through, I kept learning and growing every time I had the opportunity to work in these new roles. And then I was going to school and got my PhD. And so I really always wanted to connect research and practice to really support students and continue to focus on that vision of helping all learners reach their full potential. So all of that being said, that was the first 10 years of my career. And then when we moved back to San Diego with my family, I had the opportunity to work at the University of San Diego and put those all together.
Mhm.
And that's when you say learner centered, really thinking about the ways that students were learning and helping districts think about their goals and priorities and how we could make that just more pervasive in our schools, that everyone was working that way. So that path, I just continued to follow the journey
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
learn and grow and connect. But it was really, while I was working at the University of San Diego, as you mentioned, George Couros, I met him, and he really encouraged me to blog and write. And that's when I was able to take my ideas that I was learning about and
Mhm.
connect them and start sharing them more broadly. And that was a really important piece in that journey as well.
Yeah, not only a sort of an exciting set of circumstances and opportunities, but listeners, as you just heard, Katie has lived in some very rough parts of the world, Hawaii, San Diego. We are all living vicariously through you. Two of my favorite places, of course, and I'm not alone in that. So hearing that, it was hard enough hearing you live in San Diego. Never mind the fact that you worked in Hawaii. So uh, but really just thinking about those circumstances and those opportunities, because I often think about we have always, as a profession, thought about helping our students reach their potential. I don't think that's a new concept, but it's the learner-centered part, isn't it? That's the part that starts like putting the student versus the teacher being at the center of that experience, which is sort of the newness of what we're focusing on today, isn't it? Let's start with now, because obviously right now we are in the midst of a pandemic, which is obviously, everybody knows that. Educators are facing challenges at all angles, trying to ensure high quality instruction, safety protocols, the uncertainty of what this school year is going to bring, their own health. All of these things are creating such tension in the school experience. Now, I know you've been working with schools, with teachers this year, both last spring and in the fall. So I'm wondering what advice you have for this year specifically as teachers look ahead to this school year. And we're a few months into it, but as they think about prioritizing for this school year, what should teachers focus on? And from your perspective, what is the best way to accomplish that?
Great question. And so my husband is a teacher also, and so I'm watching him as well, and he's teaching remotely, and just the deepest empathy for teachers. I was just reading some articles,
Yeah.
and I have friends. They're saying this is the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm working
Mhm.
so hard, and still feel like I'm not very effective. And
Mhm.
so in that, we have to give each other grace, and we have to really think about what I keep asking people to focus on: what matters the most right now?
Mhm.
What will matter once we, 2020 and beyond? What are the things that we really value? So instead of just marching through the curriculum, making sure that we're giving a lot of busy work that students can't keep up with and teachers are struggling to grade and keep up with, connection with individuals, connection with students, reaching out instead of doing a whole class period or, teaching all day virtually.
Mhm.
How can we connect with students personally and really reach out to see how they're doing and to let them know that they're cared about, and then teachers value that as well.
Mhm.
So that, and then prioritizing, once we know what really matters, spending our time and our days focusing on that more authentic learning, more personal connections. More than ever right now, we need to do things that matter. And so
Mhm.
if we're just marching through doing busy work and checking things off, it creates more stress and the sense of overwhelm. I think we really need to reduce and just focus on, long-term projects. If we spent our days um, working on problems, or weeks, or months, thinking about what is something you really care about right now, and kids were researching, they were investigating, they were creating, they were
Mhm.
solving. Those are the things that we will take away from this moment in time. The worksheet that we did, that
Yeah.
the busy work and the
Mhm.
packet that we completed, those things aren't what matters. And I'm not saying skills don't matter. I'm not saying that our kids don't need to learn to read and write and compute basic math, but if we don't connect these to broader issues and goals that we are all experiencing,
Mhm.
it's going to feel so disconnected and irrelevant. And we are going to continue to lose more students and, frankly, more teachers. That's really
Right.
what I'm afraid of. Our best teachers now are saying they are broken and they're struggling. And if we lose our best teachers who are always putting on a brave face and always willing to
Yeah.
do what it takes and go that extra mile, I'm really, really scared of what's going to happen to the future of education.
Yeah, you're so right about relationships and making those personal connections, because the online environment can feel so impersonal, and those relationships for teachers too. So administrators out there, district leaders out there, as much as we want teachers to make sure they build those relationships and stay connected to their students, it's important administrators and district leaders to check in with teachers as well, because teachers are so giving to their students that they forget to give to themselves, or may not have the energy or the space to give to themselves too. Do you think a focus on, I love that idea of solving problems and creation and innovation and all of that, is that going to help ease some of the stress teachers might feel in terms of coverage? Teachers right now, I mean, obviously teachers were pressed for time to cover even in a face-to-face model. Now we move to a remote or a hybrid model. I love the idea of prioritization. That's been a common theme of many folks I've talked to. Do you think that focus on competencies, 21st century skills, helps ease some of that pressure? And if so, how? How does that ease some of the stress that teachers feel around that sort of tension, whether self-inflicted or external, that tension of coverage?
Yeah, so I really think this is one of the key things that we need to move away from in our schools and in education in general, that I have to cover it all,
Mhm.
because we have, evidence time and time again that just covering it all doesn't help students retain, doesn't help them use that knowledge in context and really have these competencies that carry with them. The things that matter
Mhm.
are that they can, we need them to read. Can they find information? Can they synthesize? Can they seek something out to learn, and can they do it on their own without a teacher telling them what to do? So I think that we have to step back and really think about what it is our goals are, and coverage is rarely the answer. And so yes, giving ourselves permission to say, I can't cover this all. Here are the things I really want my students to learn. There's a great article talking about Marie Kondoing the curriculum. Really, what are the things that bring us joy? What are the things that we
Yeah.
really want to focus on?
Mhm.
And knowing that, yeah, you're right. In face to face, we can't cover it all, and so
Right.
we certainly can't when our lives are disrupted and we're seeing students in short bursts or online, and knowing that we need to give them opportunities to figure out what their goals are, what individual students need to be working on, and what are the things that we want to really
Mhm.
focus on when we have our time together.
Yeah. It also makes me think about how we have traditionally looked at things as just through the lens of an end product or an end result. And I think as teachers who are listening right now who have engaged in either project-based learning or inquiry-based learning, what you start to realize is how enriching the experience itself is. It's the asking of the question, it's the nurturing my curiosity, it's the research, it's the hypothesizing about potential solutions. I'm also learning during that. It's not just about me producing a solution, although the questions drive that. It's that whole kind of experience that just seems to, I think, get missed sometimes, which is again why your approach, your book, learner-centered innovation, is so important to the conversation. But it leads me to this question on page 33. You write, and I always love it when people, on page 33, you said this, and as if
Tell
you
me
have your
what
whole
I
book memorized. That's right.
said.
I know I've said that to people too. They said on page 76 you wrote this, and I'm like, do you think I have my book memorized?
Just
But okay,
remind me.
that's right. Here's what you said, Katie. If you said, quote, if we want to ensure students have the skills needed to be successful and productive citizens, it is critical that we model and practice them in our classrooms, our schools, and communities, end quote. So let's explore that for a moment. Who has the ultimate say on what skills a successful and productive citizen need? I would submit to you, and you can tell me I'm wrong, but I would submit to you that the mandate of a public school is not just about the individual, that there is a kind of social contract in our society that says K-12 public education is essentially free. And in exchange for that, society has agreed through local and state or provincial governance. They have agreed to fund that. And through that, the society has a say in terms of what the outcomes of that publicly funded education system should be. So we know that either extreme, being entirely learner centered or being entirely standardized, is of course untenable. So where in your mind is the balance between being attentive to the long-term needs of a society that says this is what we want our citizens to be, while at the same time attending to the acute needs of the learners? Where's that balance between the societal needs and the needs of the learners?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think, you know, our schools were built on a system, this standardized system over 100 years ago, and the outcomes were designed for a different era, an industrial era. And they did a great job in many ways, getting more kids to go to school, more graduates, more kids going to high or college. And so when we talk about this shift to learner centered and really focusing on the learner goals and meeting the needs of society, I believe the needs of society have changed from that model, yet our system of developing those have not. So I often go to the World Economic Forum and, their goals that they update regularly. And in 2020, complex problem solving, emotional intelligence, flexibility. These are the types of creativity, of goals that they say the workforce needs, our citizens need. And yet you go back to schools, and just as you said in that quote on page 33 or whatever,
Yeah.
if we're not, are we teaching those skills specifically? So if I go into a lot of classrooms, you don't see teachers specifically teaching creativity and
Hmm.
specifically teaching problem solving in ways that are measured and talked about and guided. It is, it's up to the individual teacher largely, because the curriculum is much more focused on content, and foundational skills, yet we aren't wrapping them around those larger skills that we need students to be successful. And one of the things that many teachers have said throughout this pandemic is that it's really shown a light on students' passivity. That, they show up, they sit in their chair, they look forward, they, are seemingly
Yeah.
engaged because they're sitting in class. We give them credit and we move on. And yet we find that when these students were graduating with high GPAs, who have been, compliant and completed, don't have the skills that the businesses and our society needs to be able to discuss issues, to be able to come, solve problems collaboratively, to be able to think about flexible, innovative solutions. And so, yeah, I think that those are the things we do need to
Hmm.
be teaching, that are based on the societal needs, but also building on individual strengths and talents in the school. So,
Right.
yes, not every kid doing whatever they want all day
Right.
long,
Right.
but let's spend our days teaching kids skills that they need to solve problems today and that they'll use for the rest of their lives.
Right. So the assertion is not that it's a free for all for the individual. So when we say learner centered innovation, it's putting the learner at the center, partially in a way that helps
Yeah.
prepare them through different societal goals that should be established through the curriculum that in many places has not yet. And so you're right that there's this focus on content and this focus on coverage, and yet we're not really drilling down into the skills that are necessary for students to be adaptable citizens going forward, and trying to find that balance. So let's help listeners maybe if they're still struggling with the concept. How do you how do you define personalized learning versus say individualized learning, right? So if we say individualized learning is just I get to do whatever I want to, how would you sort of, somebody says, well, what is personalized learning? What does that mean? Personalized learning in the 21st century. How would you sort of answer that?
Yeah, great question. And I think it is important to name our terms and define them.
Hmm.
Uh, when a lot of times personalized learning is connected to technology. We had this whole big personalized learning that you sit a kid at a computer, they can take a test and know where they are, and work on adaptive curriculum. And so that is not necessarily my definition of personalized learning. It starts with the person, the individual, and who they are, their interests, their strengths, their goals, and that makes it more personal. I think you mentioned earlier, when those authentic learning experiences,
Hmm.
we learn best when it's personal and it means something to us, and we
Hmm.
have those opportunities to act as individuals. And so instead of sitting at a desk, filling out a worksheet, doing the end of the chapter test because that's on the pacing guide, when I think
Hmm.
about classrooms that are focused on personalized learning, they know each individual learner, the learners know themselves, they know their goals. This doesn't mean we don't have learning targets, it doesn't mean that we don't have clear, transparent goals that we're trying to achieve, but we each individual knows where they are in relationship to that goal, and they have opportunities to work with peers, to do some research, to learn in a small group these basic skills. They might get some direct instruction, but it is because of the individual and where they are, not because of the pacing guide that was externally designed and is being implemented.
Yeah, it's something where for years now I feel like I've been answering the same questions, maybe not as frequently as you, but just the question about how do you do personalized learning when you have curricular standards, and this idea that standards seem to always equate to standardization, and it need not.
Right.
equate to that, right? Our standards could be innovation. Our standards could be critical thinking. Our standards could really focus students on those 21st century skills. And that doesn't mean they're taught or assessed in a standardized way. So we just have to keep sort of messaging that, I think, because it's important that teachers realize that there's a lot you can do within the perceived constraints. And of course, there are constraints within curricular standards, but not as many as might be perceived, right? I mean, not as many as you
Right.
might first think. Yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, when you think about standards, I mean, if you look at, there's obviously a lot of pushback on Common Core and different perspectives, but if you look at the
Hmm.
Common Core standards, I will say to families, what is it that you don't want your kids to know?
Right.
Right? Like
Yeah.
you want them to be able to read and understand
Hmm.
the text, and you want them to make informed decisions. You want
Yeah.
students to be able to persevere and persist in, the
Hmm.
math. And so it's not the standards that are the problem. It's the curriculum that has been
Hmm.
adopted that is standardized. And
Right.
so it's often the way that it's described in a textbook
Hmm.
or in a curriculum guide, not necessarily the standards. So if you really focus on the end goal, then you can navigate that in ways that are meaningful for students and the community in which you live and work and teach.
Yeah, when I listen to people complain about Common Core, so as an outsider, as a Canadian, but I spend a lot of time in the United States working with schools and districts, their complaints about Common Core are really complaints about standardized testing and curriculum, not about the goals of Common Core itself. And I'm not saying that it's the be all and end all or the model for everybody, but the goals are sophisticated and they're deep, and there is
Yeah.
critical thinking. There's all of that in there. It's the standardized testing that gets conflated. So let's go and talk a little bit about. I was very intrigued by your idea around an innovation ecosystem on page 65. So here I go again, Katie, quoting you. Try to remember what you wrote a few years ago. You write on page 65, change in education is about creating better ecosystems for learning and innovation, not just better programs and tools. And I thought that really caught my attention. So what is an innovation ecosystem and how do we develop and nurture that?
Yeah. So I like to describe it in three concentric circles. And so again, as we've talked about, starting with the learners, most of our systems are designed based on other metrics. The learners come kind of second or third in line. So if we start with learners and those goals we really care about, and I love it when they are designed locally. So what is it this community cares about? Do they want creative students? Do they want problem solvers? Do they want kids who can be creative and innovative? Whatever those things are, if you start with that learner profile and get really clear about that, then you can design your learning experiences based on those goals. And so that second tier layer for the circle is really, then what are those learning experiences we want to see? And I often ask people to think about and reflect on experiences that have been really meaningful to them as learners. And so just as you shared, they're personal, they're authentic, there's opportunities for revision and struggle and reflection. So we really want to build in those types of learning experiences so that we can get to those core goals. And then the outside layers, what does the community look like for leadership? How is the vision transparent to everybody? What's the accountability system? Are we holding people accountable for those goals we care about? Or do we have some totally mismatched accountability system? And so that ecosystem, they're not three separate things. It's not learners, it's not curriculum, it's not assessment and vision. They're intertwined, and they have to work together to be able to create the best learning environments. And I also think that this ecosystem exists in a classroom. So the teacher creates this. It also exists at schools and in our districts, and it impacts how people work together and how they see their role in education.
Right. It's so tempting for folks to go find a shrink wrap binder or some sort of online program to teach creativity or critical thinking or what have you, but trying to build that culture. And how do you think we sustain that? So once a teacher starts to establish that, what are some of the fundamentals that kind of, once we've developed that ecosystem, what prevents us from slipping back into old habits, or how do you think we sustain that over time? How does
Yeah,
that become habit?
Habit, and I think it's also the accountability. So
Okay.
accountability seems to be a bad word, right? Because
Yeah.
it's equated with standardization. But
Right.
I don't think accountability is bad. And I just got off the call with a superintendent who was talking about he took his learner profile and he has aligned the metrics with the board, with the teachers, their
Mhm.
evaluations, their own accountability metrics. And so all of these are closely linked. And
Yeah.
so now I know what I'm working towards. I don't have someone saying, in this beautiful message on our website that creativity matters, and then they're holding me accountable to the benchmark test on this day that my kids know, the depth of content.
Right.
And so when those things are aligned, then we create systems where teachers can collaborate, developing that sense of efficacy and collaboration that
Mhm.
is focused on the right goals that
Yeah.
matter, and they are working together, that students are held accountable to those goals. They know what they're working towards. They have show evidence of their own, how they're developing those skills, and it's building throughout the system. It
Mhm.
has to be intentional all the time. Just as
Yeah.
intentional as we've been about standardized tests, we've built
Mhm.
that ecosystem. And
Right.
so now we need to unwind some of those things and really align them to the metrics that matter and that we care about.
Yeah, it's interesting that it all seems to be about the setup. We talked earlier about the curriculum and the standards. What are our standards, and can we focus those standards on innovation? Can we focus them on competencies? And here again, it's not the issue of accountability. We are all accountable. Public school systems are accountable to the public. We mentioned that earlier. Private schools are accountable to boards of directors and different governing bodies. But it is, to what are you being held accountable? Are you being held accountable to content depth, or are you being held accountable to developing innovative thinkers and creators and critical thinkers? It just seems that all of this is assisted by taking a deeper dive and maybe rethinking that which we are holding people accountable to, and reprogramming that, if you will, and rethinking that so that it starts to sort of flow through our system. So I love that concept of an ecosystem, and just creating that kind of environment where there's this interdependency that kind of all feeds on each other. Um, can you walk us through the teacher as designer continuum? That's something that also caught my attention in the book. Should teachers view that continuum, from replicate, adapt, integrate, and innovate? Should they view that as a hierarchy for their own professional growth? Should they view that as a menu of available options? How should a teacher consume that teacher as designer continuum?
Yeah, I think the reason or how that kind of came about is when I was in the classroom, I, looked at those shiny little binders and shrink wrapped curriculum and went, no thanks.
Yeah.
I want to design
Yeah.
these projects and I want to get to know my students. And I would spend a lot of time doing it, but that's what I enjoyed. And that's where I found more success with my students.
Mhm.
And then I became a coach and realized that there were so many different approaches when I saw, my 8 colleagues teaching the same thing in very different ways. Um, I realized how important those foundational building blocks were to build from. And so when we don't provide that foundation for people to build from, we lower the floor, right?
Right.
Because we start saying like everyone has to start from scratch, and our
Mhm.
own experiences don't necessarily provide us those opportunities to create those relevant, meaningful experiences from scratch in every classroom across the board. So if we create and build this great foundation, that some curriculum is not a bad thing, but we don't want that to be the ceiling, right? So if we
Right.
want to be able to understand that there's a great foundation we're building from, and if I choose to just come in and start from there, that should be fine. And in some places, my reading curriculum and teaching kids the foundational skills of reading, I might build from this really great robust resource and just use that. But when I want to start having kids choose books to read, that's where I might be more innovative and say, I want to do literature circles and let kids pick different books and come together and not just focus on the basal reader, because
Mhm.
I don't think that that's meeting the needs of my students.
Right.
So it's much more about where do we lifting the floor so we all start from a really great place, and
Mhm.
then providing teachers learning opportunities and permission to say,
Hmm.
this is not, you can innovate, you can build from this, you can replicate it, but you can also adapt it, and you can also innovate based on your students, and giving them the permission, the tools, and the space to be able to do that, and then share. So I do think, and I don't think you have to do it in all, elementary
Right.
school teachers. It's not like reinvent everything. It's pick a few
Yeah.
things here and there that are meaningful. And then once someone has innovated, you share that. And
Right.
another teacher can totally take it and adapt it for their needs.
Hmm.
So definitely not a hierarchy, but I wanted to just make more explicit
Okay.
what teachers do as they take resources and make them their own,
Mhm.
without everyone feeling like they have to start from scratch.
Yeah. And starting from that foundation is really, is that critical part. We went through a massive reorganization of our curriculum here in British Columbia, and it really focused on 21st century competencies. But one of the mistakes in messaging that came out was this idea that it's all about the competencies and knowledge doesn't matter anymore. And yet you can't be creative and innovative without being creative and innovative about something. So you have
Right.
to have that foundation, right? And I think unfortunately, I think we're coming around on that, but we unfortunately had this false dichotomy that was created between competencies and knowledge. You have to think critically about something,
Yeah.
and I think building that foundation is a really important piece. Have you seen that elsewhere where that
Yeah,
messaging kind of gets
Tom, I
mixed?
think that, oh, all the time. And I think sometimes when I say things, people assume that, learner centered, it's just do whatever you want. And, let's
Yeah.
just come in and let kids. And then, teachers are like, but I have to teach something,
Hmm.
how can I just be learner centered? And so I do, it is a total false dichotomy.
Yeah.
And so, we want to be able to expand students' horizons, right? We want to teach
Yeah.
them new things. And there is knowledge that's really important. There's these foundational skills that are critical that we want to be building on.
Hmm.
But that also is not the ceiling. So
Right.
we want to be able to we need to teach these skills, but there also needs to be ways that kids are applying them in ways that matter. And
Yeah.
so I think it kind of goes back and forth in this ecosystem of, what are my goals? What are things I care about? What are problems I want to solve? Oh, what skills do I need to learn to be able to do that? What do I
Hmm.
already have? What do I need to learn? And so I think it's really being transparent about the skills that
Hmm.
are foundational and more linear, but also about the application of those skills and those competencies that are much more aligned to these 21st century skills of creativity and problem solving.
Yeah.
And they're not separate.
No,
They're very
no,
much
it's
intertwined.
right, for sure. And my colleagues, Nicole Dimich and Cassandra Erkins, and I often describe it as the means and ends switching places. In other words, there are some things that we used to do, back in the 90s. When I started teaching as a high school history teacher 30 years ago, I put kids into groups and had them do a group project, but the goal was content acquisition. I wasn't teaching them how to collaborate. I didn't teach them how to resolve conflict. I didn't teach them how to come to consensus, those types of things. So now the way we express it is that we're no longer using collaboration to acquire content. We're using content to teach you how to collaborate. We're using content to teach you how to innovate. We're using content to teach you how to think critically. So it's almost a reversal of purpose. And that seems to help people understand that this isn't a dismissal of knowledge, but it's a repurposing of knowledge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what I want to highlight that you just said that's so important is teaching those skills. We
Mhm.
sometimes say my kids can't collaborate, and then we leave it at that and move on.
Right.
Instead of saying our jobs are to teach them how to collaborate. Our
Right.
jobs are to teach them how to resolve that conflict and problem solve.
Right.
And in that, those are the skills that are
Hmm.
important. And yeah, absolutely content is part of that.
Yeah.
So
It's
instead, you see kids who are successful and they're like, oh, because I figured out how to manage my time. I
mhm.
figured out how to
Yeah.
prioritize. And
Yeah.
so instead, let's not make that just a kid figured it out on the side. Let's make that part of, the core of what we teach,
Right.
in addition to the skills, so that they can start navigating their journey. And we as the teachers don't have to be the one to drag them along each step of
Right.
the way.
Right. That level of intentionality for me is the biggest difference now between what we may have done at a very pedestrian level in the past. Now there's real focus and attention on that, which leads me to my sort of final question around your perspective. We've got a few other questions to talk about, but this final question, of course, I want to talk about assessment, because assessment always seems to be that, elephant in the room when it comes to innovation and competencies. Myself and my colleagues assert that we can't develop anything. We can't make these claims of developing innovative or creative thinkers and not assess it. We don't have to test it necessarily in the traditional sense that we've always tested it, but it has to be assessed in order to support that collective claim about developing innovative thinkers for the 21st century. So teachers can often feel overwhelmed by trying the prospect of creating innovative thinkers, never mind trying to assess them and assessing innovation and all that. So when you talk about assessment in the work that you do, how do you advise teachers on the assessment of innovation and creativity? What's the approach, and what is some of the advice that you give to them?
Yeah, constantly evolving. But I think
Mhm.
one of the things that I have learned is it's contextual, like many things. And so in some places I'm really creative, but in some situations I'm not very creative, depending on, my comfort level and just who I am.
Right.
So I also think it's something that students need to own, right? I need to own. So how do we be really explicit about those goals and what that looks like, and bring students in to do the self-assessment,
Mhm.
bring peers in to talk about it, show examples. So I see this much more in a way of a portfolio of
Mhm.
really showing multiple pieces of evidence over time of
Mhm.
when students are showing their creativity, their problem solving, when they've showed persistence. So it really, I think, begins with clear goals, individual goal setting, collection of evidence and self assessments over time.
Mhm.
And I love when my kids do their student led conferences and they come and show, look, mom, this is how I've been growing. Here's this great piece of writing. Do you see how I revised it over time? And I
Mhm.
showed that persistence. And so those are the ways that we can document it and assess it, but it doesn't have to be a teacher sitting alone, marking their sometimes always never creative. That's not going to be helpful for educators.
Yeah.
It's not helpful for the individuals.
Right.
I made the mistake in my learning journey working with a district. We sat down and we mapped out and made all these rubrics of what it is to be a creative and innovative thinker. And then as soon as teachers started using the checklist, the energy and just got sucked out of the room
Right.
because it became so standardized instead of something that we were growing. So if we want to grow creativity and problem solving, then we want to show examples of it and keep building on it. You don't just
Mhm.
like learn creativity in second grade and you're done,
Right.
right? You're always growing. And so those same skills that we want a second grader to be able to show, I also should expect that of myself as a leader in an organization. I just
Mhm.
am going to show examples of what that looks like in different ways. But those are skills that we continue to grow and nurture and develop over time, and they show up in different ways.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I exactly answered that, but I don't think that we look at assessing these skills the same ways that we've been assessing content knowledge.
Right.
I think we
Y-
have to expand our view of assessment, who's part of that process, what it's for, and how we can make it more of a long-term portfolio building type of process instead of a check mark on a report card.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that. While I, earlier made the assertion that in order to make the claim that we are doing these things and developing 21st century, thinkers and creators and innovators, we have to have some substance to support that claim. But that doesn't mean the evidence we use to support that claim is identical to that which we've used for content. I also loved your reference to context, because I think, just as we've seen, and I think the research on critical thinking is much more extensive, but I think, it's just logical to know that the depth of my knowledge within a subject discipline will lead to the depth of my creativity or critical thinking, right? So how much I know in science is going to allow me, because you think about who's innovative in our society, it's those who have expertise, right? And so expertise, even Howard Gardner talks about 5 minds of the future, and one of them is developing an expertise and knowing things and learning about the competencies within the context of that subject area, which I think is a wise way to approach that. It makes me also think about a question that I've just constantly wrestled with, which is, how do we assess creativity? I'd be interested in your response to this. How do we assess creativity without stifling creativity, right? A lot of people say to me, Tom, we shouldn't assess creativity because that will diminish someone's willingness to be creative. Interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I think we want to capture it, right? So
Hmm.
the assessment is much more, like you said, showing evidence.
Hmm.
What are some ways? And so I would ask students, what are some ways that you have been creative? How did you tackle that problem? What did it
Hmm.
look like? And how do you have evidence of how you have been creative? And that would look very different,
Yeah.
in different people. So my daughter would show her art and these beautiful things that she's created. My son might be really creative in a way that he is like solved a problem and put something together and how he figured that out. So
Hmm.
again, contextual, but I really think it has to be on the learner and showing that evidence. Because if
Hmm.
we do go, oh yeah, you're a creative person, right?
Hmm.
We've learned across the board that
Right.
creativity is not a narrow way that we've defined it in art class, but
Right.
it is really about how we solve problems and how we look at the world. And I think your point around expertise is something that is like worthy of being highlighted again and
Hmm.
again, that
Yeah.
we are creative and critical thinkers in places that we have deep expertise.
Hmm.
And when we're novices in some areas, we definitely can't come up with, aren't likely to come up with these like
Right.
really thoughtful ways to solve the problem because we don't have the deep expertise. And so it's knowing what you know and what you don't, and
Right.
being able to find and develop that expertise as well.
Yeah, that is, I mean, that view of creativity, that was a decade ago. I remember having conversation with teachers who said, I can't assess creativity. I'm not an art teacher. And we just have to, at some point, realize that creativity is not just about producing something that is aesthetically pleasing,
Right.
but it really is about, that expansive view, as you talked about what it means to be innovative, and how these competencies all work together. We sometimes talk about them separately, critical thinking, collaboration, and innovation, but they really do, like collaborative problem solving incorporates at least three of them right there. It's collaboration, it's critical thinking, it's innovation to solve problems. It's that synthesis of all of those competencies. So
Yeah.
I love the idea that you talked about too, of just capturing the evidence as opposed to, the judgment, and letting the evidence kind of emerge as being evidence of where that student is in terms of their innovation, and having them articulate it. Yeah, really, really, really good thoughts. Katie, this has been great. I just have really appreciated the opportunity to chat with you. We're going to finish up today with, as I always do, with some fun questions. I like to finish every interview with a little, some lighthearted questions that, well, we've had a pretty serious conversation about innovation. And I just thought, I like to end the interviews with some fun, give people a chance to get to know Katie Martin a little bit on a personal level, nothing too intrusive, but just some fun questions that will put you on the spot a little bit and force you to
Okay.
think about let's start with this one. What's all time, what's your favorite family vacation? It could be with your family now or from when you were a child, but all time favorite family vacation memory.
Gosh, we have so many. We love to travel. So
Yeah.
I think we talk about this a lot as a family. 2 years ago we went to Thailand, and
Hmm.
we took my then 9 and 10-year-olds traveling throughout Thailand and Cambodia. Played with
Hmm.
elephants and just got to spend some really quality time exploring and learning about different culture. So
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
swimming in some beautiful oceans.
Thailand is an amazing spot for sure, and you can do that. Okay, yeah, no, you remember when we used to travel?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
it's. I always say to people, I haven't set foot in a plane since March 13th, and it's just I'm counting the days. I really miss it. Okay, second one. Who is your very first, when you were younger? Who is your very first celebrity crush?
Oh, Corey Haim.
Okay, all right.
I don't, that was like second grade, but I had
Yeah.
a very big celebrity crush
Yeah.
on Corey Haim.
Corey
That's so
Haim.
funny.
Yeah, we all have them, Mine was, I was 10. Mine was Cheryl Ladd. People probably don't remember Cheryl Ladd. She replaced Farrah Fawcett on Charlie's Angels, and I was 10 years old in 1977, and I was just enamored with her as a 10-year-old. So it's always fun. Number 3, here we go. What food item or meal did you think before you tried it, did you think you were going to hate that you now have ended up loving? What food item or meal surprised you? You thought you'd hate it, but now you love it.
Good question. Um, I think that I'll go with, I just had this recently,
Oh,
frutti di mare. So like squid and mussel
hmm.
pasta. When I was in Italy traveling, they offered it and I thought, I am not going to like this. I don't like spaghetti. And it
Yeah.
ended up being pretty amazing. And I just
Yeah.
ordered it for my birthday dinner.
There you go. Well, and happy birthday to you.
Thanks.
What was your first job? Very first job you ever had?
My first paying job was a wait or hostess at El Torito. So a little
Okay.
Mexican restaurant by my house. I went over and I was a hostess for a couple years. I ended up working there for 7 years. Still my
Wow.
longest job.
Were you a hostess the whole 7 years, or?
No, I was a hostess, and then I waited tables, and then I
Yeah.
ended up being working as a cocktail server and doing a lot of different things there over the 7 years.
Yeah.
But I
I
loved
think
it.
I think restaurants are pretty common first job. I know mine was as a busboy in a
Yeah.
restaurant. I was 14 years old, and I think restaurants definitely provide a good foundation for you. And there's it's a tough job working in a restaurant, that's for sure. All right,
Yeah, I
last.
loved it. It was great.
Yeah.
And my kids will not work in a restaurant until they're 21.
Right, right. All right, last one. All-time favorite concert you've attended?
Beastie Boys.
Beastie Boys. Okay, I love that.
Yeah,
When
it was
was it?
actually
Where was it? Tell us a story.
it was in San Diego. It was I was 16. It was my first concert. And I just remember like the energy of being on the floor and being in down the pit, and the whole state, the whole ground is just moving
Yeah,
in unison as they were performing. It was an awesome show.
yeah. So you is hip hop something that is throughout your iTunes or your Spotify?
Yeah, a little bit. I kind of listen to a little bit of everything. I was
Yeah.
the kid in high school who was like, I like anything but country. I hate country. And now more than often, I find myself like playing
Right.
some country. There's, love
Yeah.
some good 90s,
Yeah.
90s. I listen to anything these days.
Absolutely. It's funny because as I've gotten older as well, I find my taste is really simplified, is that I like good music, and it doesn't
Yep,
matter what genre. Good music is good music, and good live music is even better for sure.
yep.
Okay. I've got one final question for you, Katie. And one of the things that I'm doing with this podcast is trying to run a theme of success and happiness, and just exploring different people's perspectives on those concepts. And so I've asked every person I've interviewed this final question, and I'm interested in your perspective. And the question is simply, if a random person stopped you on the street and asked you, what is your definition of success? How would you answer them?
It's a good question. I think for me, it simply is that I can wake up in the morning, feel loved, feel inspired to do the work that I get to do, and have the means and resources to be able to do that on a daily basis,
Mhm.
without worrying about, food and shelter, and
Right.
be able to have a place to do that work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, again, just feeling inspired, feeling loved. That makes us feel success in however way we define those things. But
And
I can
getting
see
to
that.
travel too.
And
So
getting to
that
travel.
that's also having the resources to be able to travel and explore and
Right. Yeah.
enjoy the world.
When we used to be able to do those things.
Yes.
So fingers crossed, hopefully we will be able to do that sooner. We don't know what's going to happen, but we hope that is something that is hopefully on the horizon. Because like I said earlier, I miss it. and I really just miss the opportunities, both for vacation but also for work. Just being together with people is something I greatly miss. So, Katie, I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today. Listeners, I would truly encourage you to follow Katie on Twitter. Her Twitter handle is at Katie Martin EDU. I'd also really encourage you to check out her website. That's www.katiemartin.com, where there is just a ton of great information there for parents as well as for educators. There's information there about contacting Katie to come and speak or do workshops at your schools. Booking her for PD sessions. Got a link to a TEDx talk that she did, where she, I won't spoil the story about the mouse and the motorcycle, but it was a really, really great talk, and I would encourage you to go there. So again, katiemartin.com is where you'll find all the information. So Katie, again, I can't thank you enough for being here today. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure at some point we'll have a chance to do this again.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. It's been great. I appreciate your perspective as well. I learned a lot.
Great. Thanks, Katie.